we got to talk about who's going to be leading us, because if you look at Mets Twitter, there seems to be one clear and obvious guy that everybody wants, and it blows the living hell out of my mind here that Buck Showalter seems to be the clear odds-on favorite by every single person in New York Mets world.
It's crazy. Every single poll that goes up, Buck Showalter wins. He's been trending a few different times
by a landslide. It's not even close. No one wants anyone else. 70s.
Yeah. It's like him versus the field. It's not even a competition. And then you hear like Steve Cohen say things like, "We would like to have someone here with experience." You've heard that phrase be thrown around a lot. Somehow the old people have infected some people from our generation to thinking that you need a proven commodity, a winner like Buck Showalter, which is crazy. But we should talk about the rest of the short list, because I think there are some pretty interesting names on here. The other guys are Joe Espada, the Astros bench coach, Don Kelly, the Pirates bench coach, and Matt Quatrado, the Pirates bench coach. Oh, I flipped those up. Pirates bench coach, Matt Quatrado is the Rays bench coach.
Okay, yeah. I like hearing anything with the Rays, let me tell you.
Yeah, but again, the Rays, you have to think a bench coach on the Rays does probably not significantly less, but definitely probably a portion less than some other bench coaches, because it's all numbers anyway. And like I didn't even know this guy existed. Like, I at least heard of Espada before. Don Kelly, he could be anybody. If Don Kelly, if you walk by me right now, I wouldn't even have close to a clue.
Don Kelly had that little spell with the Tigers, I think, in like the late 2000s, early 2010s.
Really, I didn't know that at all. Because really, I just, from this list, I focused specifically this episode about Espada and Showalter, because I think those two seem to be emerging as the two front runners, along with Brad Ausmus, who's not formally linked yet, but I just can't imagine him being far away.
And Bruce Bochy got added to that list apparently tonight of guys that the Mets are seriously considering. And that is kind of an interesting name for me. We'll talk about it. We'll get there. We will get there. Let's talk about Buck Showalter and Joe Espada first, because like you said, and I agree with you, these are probably the guys it's between right now.
Yeah, it seems like these are at least the two front runners in the pack. Espada is a guy I like a lot. I think there's a lot of good things you could say about Joe Espada as to how he could be a very effective manager of this team. Just to give a run through of his credentials, he was a player in the major leagues and different major league systems from the late 90s through the early 2000s. He retired as a player in 2005. Immediately jumped into coaching with the Miami Marlins, at the time Florida Marlins, the team he was last associated with as a player. Immediately was the hitting coach for their A-ball team in 2006, the Greensboro Swarm or Hornets or some other stupid minor league city has been tossed around 12 times. He ended up being upgraded to the full minor league infield coordinator between 2008 and 2009, and from there he was picked up by the Marlins to be the third base coach of their major league team in 2010. So this is a guy who immediately knew he wanted to be a manager, never wanted to leave the game of baseball, and kind of rose up the ranks of a team pretty quickly that was doing some generally positive things in terms of player development this time. Not great, but the Marlins weren't like a shit show at this point, so I think that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, we all like to, poke fun at the Marlins, but they have developed players pretty well throughout the history of their organization. I mean, the whole thing is just that they got rid of them as soon as they were any good, but you can name a list of about 20 guys that are legitimately good Major League Baseball players that came from that organization, and I'm sure Joe Espada had a little bit of hand in that.
Definitely, or maybe not, because maybe we have to look at specifically infielders or guys who came specifically from these teams. There's no way of telling, but it's just the fact that he rose quickly and people around baseball kind of started to take notice that this guy was an emerging talent. Just also as an aside, he coached with Team Puerto Rico in 2013, 2017.
Team Puerto Rico.
Yeah. So that stint right there is the Marlins third base coach, and 2013 is with Puerto Rico. The Marlins kind of saw him as a bit of a manager in waiting and wanted to send him back down to A-plus ball Jupiter to be their manager for 2014. He immediately said, fuck that, and actually took a job with the Yankees front office that season instead, which is a pretty interesting move, I think, for a guy who seemed to be being groomed as a manager, who instead saw that after front office experience, right?
Yeah, and then not only that, he then finds his way back into a not manager role, because he still hasn't had that yet, but he's bench coach with the Astros. I mean, he's found his way back into being that manager in waiting again.
Absolutely. He took that front office job with the Yankees for 2 years, walked directly with Cashman and Epler. And
which is funny.
There's a reason all these guys are here. It's still a boys club at the end of the day. Connections are everything. Then from that point, the Yankees actually brought him back onto the field for a couple of years to be their infield coach and third base coach until 2017, where the Astros hired him away from them to be their bench coach. So this is a guy who was handpicked by the Yankees and Astros only a few years apart, and at the time, these were probably the two most cutting-edge organizations in all of baseball.
Yeah,
and I think is pretty important.
And the Astros are definitely still one of the most cutting-edge, organizations in baseball for sure.
The Yankees are still up there too, but they're not as probably advanced as they were during this time, which is ironically some of the worst baseball they've ever played, which is kind of funny. But it seemed like they were ahead of certain things before other teams were, like player development, sign stealing, breaking ball development, things like that. And then he also, in the last couple of years, interviewed for openings with the Rangers and Cubs, didn't get them. But there's a lot of strange connections that Joe Espada has to this team. I mentioned the WBC stuff with Puerto Rico. He coached Edwin Diaz, Seth Lugo, and I'm blanking right now.
Francisco Lindor.
Jesus Christ, I forgot he was Puerto Rican. And also that's interesting because Steve Cohen's wife is Puerto Rican. That's something that also cannot be forgotten ever. And then he's connected to Epler from those Yankees days. And shockingly, I think I texted you this the other day. You might have forgotten it, but he was drafted in the second round of the 1996 MLB draft, Joe Espada, by the Oakland A's, who were being run by Sandy Alderson. So there's a lot of deep connections that run with Joe Espada here. It seems like it's pushing him towards the front runner for this job.
Yeah, and I like the idea of bringing in Joe Espada because of who the other guy is. Now, I don't necessarily know if Joe Espada would be my number one pick in general, but when you're putting up against Buck Showalter, I definitely lean more in the Espada camp for manager of the New York Mets. I just like the idea that he seems to be a guy that one of the smarter organizations in baseball valued and had a part of their managerial staff and their coaching grabbed him. They said, we want you and you're going to be with us. And he stayed there he was handpicked. He stayed there for a bit. And whether it was between Hinch and, now Dusty Baker, he was able to stick around. So that means that this is a guy who's got some information. People value his opinion. People clearly understand, or I should say, people care about what he has to say. I like the idea of Joe Espada. I know a lot of people are going to get super, super turned off by the idea of a first-time manager again, but I can't stress this enough. Everybody at some point has to be a first-time manager, and I went to war with a guy on Twitter the other day about this because for some reason, first-time managers, it's because we had Mickey Callaway and Luis Rojas, are considered to be almost like they're just incompetent, that they're morons. But if you go through the list of managers right now in Major League Baseball, especially some of the more successful ones, a lot of their success came as first-time managers. Just to rattle off some names here. A.J. Hinch with the Astros won a World Series. He was a first-time manager. Brian Snitker, don't care how long he's been in the organization, he was a first-time manager with this Atlanta Braves team. Won a World Series. Dave Martinez, first-time manager, won a World Series. I'm forgetting a couple names, but
Craig Counsell,
Alex Cora, Kevin Cash. I mean, just because you're a first-time manager doesn't mean you're at a disability or at a disadvantage. Some of the best managers in baseball came from first-time managers. Even Dave Roberts, first-time manager with the Dodgers.
And if you look at some of the managers in baseball who have been considered good, at least in their past, they were objectively much better when they were closer to being first-time managers, specifically a guy like Joe Maddon. He had his best run of his entire career when he was a first-time manager, not his second stint or his third stint. Second stint was still good. I'd say it was honestly pretty good, but yeah. Buck Showalter's not like a second stint guy. This is a guy who, just to transition now, managed most of his games like close to the turn of the millennium. This is not a guy who should really even be involved.
Well, I like you bringing up Joe Maddon because Joe Maddon was one of the guys who was a forward-thinking guy. He was kind of ahead of the curve, and it blew by him.
Way ahead of the curve.
It blew by him so fast when he got to the Angels. That guy, I don't even know if he understands what's going on the field anymore. He looks lost out there. But Joe Maddon was forward-thinking. He was ahead of the curve, and he got blown by. This is what scares me about Buck Showalter, is Buck Showalter was never ahead of the curve. Buck Showalter was even with the curve. Whatever, he was steady with what everyone else was doing in Major League Baseball. The game's changed a ton. I don't know if he's ready.
Buck Showalter has almost never managed in a baseball where the curve existed. There was never a curve when Buck Showalter has been a part of this game. It was just a lot of guys like spitting tobacco and figuring things out. Like that's what baseball was for the first 100 years, 130 years of its existence. And that was a great sport. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes I think if we could go back to a world where there was no data in baseball at all, there would be some kind of like natural fun to it still. But that's just simply not the reality we live in. There's no world where Buck Showalter really improves your team to the point where I think he should be considered over people who, like data and consume data and have been parts of organizations that use data.
I don't mean to interrupt you here, but I was going through like old videos on Twitter just trying to find takes of Buck Showalter because I want to catch this guy in the act. There's not that many great videos of him out there just because I don't think really people care too much about what he has to say. But I did find one where he was talking about Tony La Russa coming in and taking over for the White Sox. And he had a lot of high praise, but it also felt like a little bit of a pitch for himself as to why he would be a good manager in Major League Baseball nowadays. Buck Showalter, he is not a guy that probably uses a computer too often. And I know that's a little like, joke-ish, a little meme here and there. But Buck Showalter still calls managing. He says it's an art and it's not a science. And right now, the teams that are doing it the best are treating it like a science. And whether you want to believe that or not, it doesn't matter because it's fact.
Definitely. And if you really want to dissect most of the talented managers that we listed, they all come from organizations who do treat the game of baseball like a science, because that's what it's been reduced to. For better or worse, that's the game we play. And those are the teams that win. That's how they approach this sport.
Like, let me give you an example. Like a guy like Max Muncy. Let's just go ahead and talk about him real quick. A guy like Max Muncy for the Dodgers. You don't watch, he wasn't, discovered by the Dodgers because of a feel. That was discovered because of data and information and statistics that they had on this guy. But the fact is, like, that the numbers really don't lie. And while there is some feel necessary, I don't even know if Buck Showalter has good feel.
Definitely not. But like, the point I was trying to get to before, and I completely lost the thoughts in my brain, is that a guy like Buck Showalter could probably still have value with the right organization in baseball. Like an organization that's completely 100,000% all the way headfirst into data, years into the process, successful foundation, adequate staff around. Like, that's okay. Like, I kind of said this a month ago and you jumped down my throat that if you were a 1,000,000,000% data team, a guy like Buck or Clint Hurdle or now like Dusty Baker with the Astros could add something that all the numbers in the world can't add. And like, well, you do have to tell that guy, like, you have to cut your balls off at the door. Like, you can't push back. Like, you could be the guy's guy. You can keep everybody loose. You can have your feel. But at the end of the day, like, we are making 99.9% of these decisions. And if you're okay with that, you want to be the dugout, you want to be the master of culture, that's okay. I just don't see the Mets organizational infrastructure able to do that right now, or Buck Showalter being a guy who would even listen to that claim, because he's been like a bit of a maverick his entire career.
Yeah, he's a bit of a character himself, and honestly, at the manager position right now with the Mets, I don't really want a character either. I don't want a guy who's trying to steal headlines. It feels like Buck Showalter is going to be stealing some headlines every once in a while, which is not something that we really want to hear, and that shocks me so much, even more that these, a lot of Met fans out there are proclaiming from the top of their lungs that they want Buck Showalter. I mean, you go through the history of him as a manager, and it is just mediocrity. It really is. It's
really bad overall. Like, you can dissect most of the things that Buck Showalter's ever done in the baseball field have been like, this guy's not really that good of a manager. This feel isn't that great. The Zach Britton decision in 2014 goes down, or 2015 wildcard game, goes down as probably one of the worst pitching decisions that's ever been made in a baseball game, ever.
Yeah, like, I'm sure, from some obscure game, maybe there's one worse.
Let's describe the situation for everyone, just in case they forgot or weren't aware of it at the time.
Yeah. So 2015 wild card game, they're playing the Blue Jays, and it's an extra innings too, right?
He's the 9th or the 10th, 11th, something
Whatever
like that. The game was very much in the balance.
The game was on the line, and the Orioles had a chance to either keep it close or win the game. And instead of going to Zach Britton, who had one of the best reliever years of all time, untouchable. I mean, couldn't
mention him in the Loop episode two episodes ago.
He was literally disgusting, on another planet. He was
like
so
0.80 ERA in the season,
so insanely good. And instead of going to Zach Britton, who again everyone around the league would have said is 100% the best closer in the game, he's the best pitcher in that rotation, he needs to be in. He goes, Ubaldo Jimenez. That's the guy I'm going to call to. We're going to leave in Ubaldo Jimenez, and the Orioles get knocked out of the playoffs. I mean, it's single-handedly one of the worst decisions, and of course, a manager is not made by just one decision. But the idea is that the numbers there would have told you that Zach Britton comes in the game. And if Zach Britton blows it, you lost because you made the right decision. But no, Buck Showalter chose to lose this game because he went with feel instead, and his feel was so fucking bad.
You don't even need one number involved to be completely aware that you should have a better pitcher in the game when at any moment your season could literally end. Like, why would you want a bad pitcher to have the ball in his hand when the season ends? There's no numbers involved here. Just you don't have a next inning that's guaranteed. So you have to treat every single inning like it's the last one. That is something that I would want an old school manager to really have in the forefront of his brain if I was to bring him in. That shows bad feel. That's not really a guy who fully understands, to use a word from Howie Rose, the gravitas of a moment, Yeah,
like in Ubaldo Jimenez, it's not even like he was dominant that year either. He was very mediocre. So like the decision is baffling on all fronts, and this is one of the lasting memories we have of Buck Showalter, and yet people are calling for this guy to be the definitive manager of this team after just being so critical of Luis Rojas and Mickey Callaway and previous managers for the decisions they make. We then want to go to a guy who couldn't have been given an easier decision, and he still fucked it up.
And we could take these like single pitching decisions aside, because everybody makes bad pitching decisions.
Yes.
Like everyone makes awful pitching decisions. Every single manager across baseball, no matter what anyone on Twitter will lead you to believe. Even Alex Cora fucks up a pitching decision sometimes, even though he has such great feel. Past that, Buck Showalter is still just entirely mediocre. The guy's managed 3,000 games in Major League Baseball, spanning from 1992. So before most of you guys listening, including Mark and I, were born, up until 2018 with the Orioles. And those last 2 seasons with the Orioles were bad. And then one of the worst seasons in baseball history as a 47-win team. But of course, that Orioles team by the end of his tenure there was piss poor, pitiful team. Probably almost tanked Buck Showalter's career 500 win percentage. Somehow, this just actually shocked me. It made me stutter that sentence. Buck Showalter is so old that he has a tie in his record. Buck Showalter has tied the game. 1995, the New York Yankees. Somehow there was a tie. I can't even fathom that. How'd that happen?
I have no clue. I really don't even have the slightest idea.
How could he have tied? Was that because that was like a post-strike year and it was short and they had a weird rule, like 7-inning doubleheaders or something?
Maybe. I don't know.
How the fuck? We should do a whole episode one time. Buck Showalter's tie.
If he becomes the manager, we will.
100%. But so again, this guy's been just mediocre for 3,000 games. And some people, like my dad this morning at brunch, was like, he never really had great teams. Well, I think a lot of people should realize that 3 times after Buck Showalter left organizations, the team began a run of success that was actually pretty significant. Twice he left the team. The next year, that team won the World Series. Back-to-back jobs. The Yankees he left in 95 and the Diamondbacks he left in 2001. That is shocking shit. And he was very good in his last couple of years with those teams. The Yankees in 1993 won 88 games. 1994, season that ended in August, they went 70-43. One of the best teams in baseball. And 1995, his last year, another strike-shortened season, he went 79-65. The Yankees had the wherewithal to get him out of the building, bring in Joe Torre and sustain a dynasty. With the Diamondbacks, took over the job in 1998. He didn't have a very good season, didn't have a very good team. Won 100 games in 1999. I don't think anybody in God's green earth would think that the Diamondbacks won 100 games in the year 1999. And then they were 85-77 the next year, and then he was gone. And then the next year they won the World Series. And then he actually was the manager of the Rangers. I didn't even know this.
I was just about to bring that one up.
When they traded A-Rod, he left them in 2006 after 2 straight years of hanging out around 500. By 2009, the team was a perennial powerhouse with first-time manager Ron Washington.
Yes, which back-to-back World Series as well.
Yes. So this guy, it seems to be not the best manager either, as well as being old and curmudgeon-y.
And listen, I'll play a little devil's advocate here for Buck Showalter because I know we're going a little hard on him. But as you can probably tell, we don't want him as the manager. This is the reason we're trying to convince people. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day what we think because the Mets will make their decision and they're not listening to us and they don't give a shit what we have to say.
I would call it more of an inference than a suggestion. Like I just think based on what we know about Buck Showalter, he probably would be less likely to collaborate in a effective and positive and open-minded way than a guy like Joe Espada, who has made an emphasis in his career to be around data and use it to the best of his capabilities.
Which it seems like he would be, and that's why I'm more willing to go with him because he's been a part of organizations that have been doing this, and he's been a part of it, and he sees how it works. So therefore, he understands how things are done. Where Buck Showalter, the last time he managed was with the Orioles, and that was many, many moons ago. I mean, it
wasn't even that long ago. I can't believe his last year was actually 2018. That's shockingly recent.
Whoa, hold on. 2018?
Yes, that was the last time he managed with the Orioles.
Oh my God, it feels like he's been out of baseball for 10 years. Baseball's changed a lot in that time as well.
A ton. He was a manager of the team in 2018 that won 47 games.
And I think it is fair to say that players have had some good things to say about Buck. I mean, Adam Jones came out and raved about him. And
I'm sure Buck Showalter's a hell of a baseball guy, a hell of a baseball mind. I'm sure there are a lot of things he can add. I just think there's other people who could add more.
Yes, and I'm afraid of the worst case scenario, which would be that Buck Showalter comes in, bamboozles us, and does whatever he wants, and that's just not going to work.
Definitely, and this is also coming from a place where I don't think either of us are as afraid of this concept of a first-time manager coming in and kind of getting caught with his pants down. I just don't see that as something that could happen. I think that did happen to Mickey Callaway, but that was more of the way he handled the media. I think Rojas wasn't great, but I don't think he was the demise of this team, and I think that some people just kind of see a lot of similarities between Espada and Rojas, and that scares them away, which is true to a degree, but I also don't think it really is at all.
No, I think, it's comparing apples to oranges. Like, they're both fruit. They're both first-time managers, but they're very different.
I'm sorry, it's funny. I also do think that in modern baseball, especially when you look at the Mets, who they have two pretty prized jewels who you hope to be on this team within the next 24 months, who are, as we know, much more comfortable speaking Spanish than English, I think it helps to have multiple people inside of a dugout that are fully and wholly fluently bilingual.
Yeah.
You can't really understate how important that is. We couldn't talk to Francisco Alvarez in English. I don't think that Buck Showalter could either.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna, again, maybe it's unfair of us to assume this, but I get it.
Maybe if Buck Showalter is fluent in Spanish, someone tweeted me, I will publicly correct my mistake and address the gaffe I've made, but I'm just assuming he isn't.
Yeah, and
It doesn't.
Yeah, no, I'm assuming the same thing. And listen, we've been talking about the manager for like 20 minutes now. What it comes down to is we just want the best guy who's going to give the Mets the best chance to win. If that is Buck Showalter and he proves that he can do it, again, I'll be happy to be wrong, just like we were with Billy Epler.
Yeah, thrilled. If this is just the way that we start jinxing people from now on, like that'd be okay too. I just want to make sure it's someone who is ready for the challenge and is going to listen to everything that people tell him.
Yep, and whoever it is, get the right guy. That's all I'm asking for. Get the right guy.
And take your time, because there's absolutely no fucking rush at all right now, because as everyone in the baseball world knows, and if you don't, we're about to tell you, we locked out last week and things are dead.